On July 15, 1976, in Chowchilla, California, a day that the town would like to forget forever, yet remains a part of its history, at around 4 p.m., school bus driver Ed Ray was driving 26 students of Dairyland Elementary School home from a summer class trip to the Chowchilla Fairground swimming pool. Ray was described as a humble rancher with a humble day job, stocky, about 55 years old. A guy you would not want to pick a fight with, a guy who works with his hands and doesn't talk much. On this particular day, Ed's bus was rowdy, but the kids all loved him for his patience and reliability. The kids were loud and excited after just having spent the afternoon swimming. Some of them were even singing. However, when the bus turned onto Avenue 21, Ray saw a white Dodge van blocking the road with its door open. He tried to weave around the empty van when a guy in overalls with pantyhose covering his face jumped out in front of the bus with a revolver. The man walked to the driver's side window and asked Ed, with no intimidation in his voice, "Would you open the door, please?" Ed opened it, and two more identically dressed figures jumped in, one with a rifle, quickly pointed at Ed. Everybody went to the back of the bus. The one without a rifle started to drive, and the one with the revolver hopped in the van to follow them. They drove about a mile and parked the bus in a bamboo thicket. The entire ride was apparently so silent that it added to the pure horror of it. The bus was hidden near the Chowchilla River, and 12 kids were ushered into the white van that was following the bus. Ray and the other 14 kids got into the back of the second van that was waiting at the location, this one green. There was a partition separating the driver's seat to the back of the van, and all the windows were sealed. Ed and all the kids sat in the backs of these vans for 11 whole hours in the pitch black and extreme heat, all the while scared for their lives, not knowing what was going to happen next. Some of the older kids started to sing songs to try to lighten the incredibly setting and make the younger kids feel better, songs like "If You're Happy and You Know It." Meanwhile, back in town, it only took 15 minutes after the bus not showing up that parents began to wonder what was going on. That's how punctual Ed always was. Within the hour, the missing bus was being talked about on the local news stations. Parents helped police by tracing the route the bus usually took, and by that evening, they found the abandoned bus. Within hours, 30 FBI agents arrived on the scene, and an intense investigation was underway to find the kids and Ed. Late that night, the vans finally arrived at a rock quarry 100 miles away in Livermore, 3:30 in the morning, at which point Ed had been awake for 24 hours. The back doors of the van swung open and two guys were waiting. Ed was the first one out. He was handed a flashlight and then told and then go down a hole with a ladder in it. Above ground roll were being taken for the children, and their names were written as they were made to leave the bus one by one. Then they were stripped and sent to join it down the ladder into what was referred to as the hull, which turned out to be an old moving van placed in a large dugout hole 12 feet underground. Ed immediately worried that the ceiling would cave in or that they'd suffocate. However, there were two air shafts, hoses, that ran above ground to a tree. There were also some mattresses on the ground and a pathetic amount of necessities: Wonder Bread, peanut butter, potato chips, water jugs, and some holes carved for toilets. After all the kids were inside, one of the captors said, "We'll be back for you." Then, a steel plate slid over the entrance and was weighted down by something. They, of course, begged to be let out, and many of the younger children screamed. Then, they heard repeated thumps on top of the van. They couldn't see it, but their captors were shoveling dirt on top of the van, burying them alive. Panic ensued in the trailer when it was realized what was happening. Ed tried his best to keep everybody calm. Ed and Michael Marshall, the oldest kid in the group who was 14, started to push at the lid to try and open it, but it was pointless. By now, Ed instructed everyone to eat and get some rest. 12 hours later, the food was already consumed, and the ventilation system that was keeping the van cool stopped working. The hot July air started to fill the tight space. On top of that, the roof of the van started to cave in, and additional time was very limited. The survivors, now adults, recount that around this time, as the walls and ceiling of the van were caving in and there was no food left, they were starting to realize they wouldn't likely make it out of this alive. Ed and Michael started to pile up the mattresses in the trailer to get to the roof, which had been covered with a heavy sheet of metal and weighted down. with 200-pound industrial batteries. After hours of effort, Ray and Michael wedged the lid open with a piece of wood and moved the batteries. They then dug away the remainder of the debris, blocking the entrance. 16 hours after they had entered the van, the group emerged and walked to the quarry's guard shack, where a security guard called the police. Ed and the children were brought to a nearby jail where they were fed and interviewed by police. The captors were three men, Frederick Newall Woods, James Schoenfeld, and his brother Richard. Frederick's family owned the quarry that the van was buried at. The three men were finding themselves in financial struggles, so they planned to hijack the bus and demand a $5 million ransom to release the group. The men would flee when they saw the group escaped, though, but they were found after a 2-week manhunt. They were found guilty and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012, and James Schoenfeld was paroled on August 7, 2015. Frederick Woods was denied parole 15 times because he owned the quarry. However, in March of this year, he was granted parole as well. Rightfully so, people of Chowchilla and people around the world were sickened at the fact that the three men who committed this kind of monstrous act could ever roam the streets again. If Michael and Ed hadn't stepped up and dug the group out of that van, they likely would not have survived. Ed Ray died in 91 on May 17, 2012, but he is still remembered as a hero to this day.